Hemant, shall we begin?
Let's do it.
So I love talking to people like Hemant because he's the kind of guy who texts you the night before an event and says, Eric, please, no easy questions.
That's not a good start.
But quite seriously, before you here is one of the most prolific and intellectually serious voices in venture capital on the subject of artificial intelligence. He has written 4 books about AI. He has co-founded a nonprofit around it. He bought a hospital to test it. And in many ways, he has staked his firm's identity on AI. And Hemant, if that's not authenticity, I don't know what is. You have studied AI for years, and you track its progress as closely as anyone. Just to establish some context, since the beginning of the year, the big 3 in the United States, Google, OpenAI, and Anthropic, have released 7 foundation model updates, the equivalent of 1 a week, and with Anthropic rolling out Claude Sonnet 4.6 just today. Mistral AI, the European champion, has released 2 new models, and of course, timed for China's Lunar New Year, we've seen the release of DeepSeek V4 and Alibaba's Qwen 3.5. Hemant, will we reach a plateau at some point, or will the pace of evolution in AI, and in particular in these foundation models, keep accelerating?
Yeah, first of all, it's a really unique time, as you said, and I've been saying this for a couple of years. This is all about navigating ambiguities. We actually don't know where the scaling laws tap out. I will say that the pace of the progress of these models actually seems to be accelerating, because you have some of these recursive habits where the models are training the models themselves. You're starting to see that. So I actually think there might be another knee in the curve in how fast the progress does happen. At least we're investors in Anthropic and Mistral, and a lot what we are seeing, listening to the folks building at the Frontier Labs, is that it is accelerating. It's pretty exciting, and it's also breathtaking. If you're an investor trying to think about what is going to last and what is going to sort of, in the next release, not be something that's worth investing in again.
Breathtaking, exciting. Is it also at least a little bit terrifying?
It's very terrifying. I think if you go all the way back to GPT-3, when the models started becoming more visceral in terms of what they can do and the art of the possible, and you started to see some of these thin wrapper companies emerge. They were looking very interesting because their adoption was so fast, and lots of early venture capital money in applied AI went there. And then a year later, it was pretty clear that those technologies weren't really going to be enough to build a business. I think there's a version of that continues to happen. So thinking through durability, not just revenue growth as an investor, is very, very difficult in these times. All because it's so exciting in terms of what the technology and the models are able to do for us.
Before I left for India, I'm based in New York, by the way. Before I left for India, I spoke to a CEO back in the city who runs the asset management division for one of the big insurance companies. And he described his state of mind as AI-induced paralysis. The models are evolving so quickly, he said, that his management team simply can't keep up with the capabilities, let alone the disruptive power they have. How is anyone supposed to keep up with this?
It's very hard. I'll actually give you a real-life example of what happened a couple of weeks ago. So we have obviously a lot of companies that are building on top of these models, enterprise infrastructure to accelerate diffusion of AI. And I called one of the CTOs and I said, hey, I'm going to New York, also New York, and I'd love to review the product roadmap with you. And so this was, I sort of gave him a week notice. And I showed up and he said, listen, I've tried to develop this a couple of times, and every time I take a shot at it, it actually obsolesces. Because on a daily, weekly basis, the innovation and the progress is so fast that things you thought were the problems you were solving, the models have actually solved for you. So, the closer you are to the infrastructure side, the harder it is to be able to tell because these capabilities are expanding. If you look at the enterprises, it's the same thing, which is how do you make enterprise transformation decisions when the underlying stacks are like quicksand? We talk a lot about this inside of our firm in terms of, what is foundation?
That's a great term, quicksand, yes.
That you're building these on. So it's a tricky time. At the same time, the worry for the CEOs is that if we don't make these investments, somebody else will, and 3 to 5 years from now, we're going to be rendered irrelevant by our competitors that got it right. And that's where the ambiguity is, and the risky part of this is, as enterprises think through their adoption.
Some people in the room might be feeling some anxiety around that ambiguity. Any tips or tricks or advice for how to manage it?
We're at the bar tonight. We can have a drink together and figure it out.
I'll be there.
Well, I think the first thing is you can't be frozen. You have to adopt it, and I think you need to create a culture where your entire team is getting their hands dirty with the models. That's probably the biggest piece of advice, because the organizations need to viscerally become AI native, and once that happens, the creativity will unleash, and you have to start building essentially your AI teammates in the different departments so that you are getting ready for what the organization need to look like on the other side of where these models do start to stabilize in terms of their capabilities, or at least understanding their surface area, what they're going to cover versus what needs to be built on top.
I'm going to make an observation. Most of the CEOs whom I've talked to about this very issue in the United States are following your advice. They are investing, even if they can't see, even if the future, if you will, is a bit of a hazy mirage. When I was at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland a few weeks ago, I spoke to some European CEOs, and on the whole, they had adopted a very different posture, much more of a wait-and-see posture. That, on the basis of what you suggest, sounds like a very dangerous thing to do.
I think it's very dangerous. And in Europe, it is a bit of a mixed bag. We see some companies and CEOs that have the courage to say we need to innovate and forge ahead, and there's some that are frozen. And I think some of it is because of the regulatory lack of clarity as well as to what's going to happen. Some of it is because, well, what's the European sovereign AI? This is a place where Mistral is making significant headway. I think that's a topic here as well. As you think about strategic autonomy in critical sectors, what do we bet on in terms of models for these critical industries? So there is some of that, and I everybody we spend time with, we encourage them to be like, you can't be frozen. You got to keep moving forward. You need to invest in using these technologies, or somebody else will be better positioned in your markets.
The situation we're talking about, as you may have noticed, has finally caught up with the financial markets in the form of the so-called AI fear trade. It has been a wickedly sharp rotation away from sectors perceived as the most vulnerable to autonomous AI agents. In the United States, they're calling it the SaaSpocalypse, right? The collapse of the software as a service business model. And those of you here in India may have noticed that the Nifty IT index has cratered in the past 2 weeks, and two examples of that are Wipro and Infosys, both down about 20% in that space of time. Hemant, you understand, I think it's fair to say, the threat that artificial intelligence, particularly agentic AI, poses to these and other sectors. In your opinion, are investors being too bearish, or perhaps not bearish enough?
Yeah, so first of all, let's talk about what is happening. So I think if you go into social sphere today and read around what people are starting to do with Claude, a lot of what's happening in the companies is they will go and essentially replace pieces of SaaS software that they're using with Claude building them a replacement software. And that is happening in many different use cases in enterprise, okay? And we have companies even here one of the CEOs we were chatting with that has gone and replaced 6 of their core sort of packaged SaaS companies, and they're saving $8 million a year because they were able to get Claude to build what was good enough for their operations. Okay, that's what's really happening. So when you see that, you start to say, boy, what is really going to happen with these SaaS companies, which was fundamentally a set of workflows on top of databases, and these frontier models should be able to do that pretty well. So there's an over-rotation. There's a lot of fear that these companies won't really have ability to grow as the diffusion of these models accelerates. So that's really what the SaaS couple, probably said it. Yeah, actually, what's really going on in the market. So my personal view is, I think we have over-rotated, so it's going to come back. But the reality is that if a lot of this gets commoditized because the models can do this for us, and frankly can build workflows that are more in line with our own secret sauce as any single business versus what was built by a company that serves many of us, right? So it becomes highly tuned to our own business. If that's actually going to happen, then how do you value these companies? Even when you sort of get over some of the fears, is SaaS software going to be interesting enough from a multiple standpoint?
Yes.
Okay, that to me is a more durable issue in what's happening. And if that becomes an issue, then think about all the companies that have been built over the last decade that haven't exited, that are fundamentally good companies that are growing, but their valuations are just so far ahead of where they sit that they may never be able to grow into those values. I think that's where this will really rubber meets the road. And even last night at midnight, I was on with our entire investment team reviewing our own portfolio, saying, what are the kinds of companies that are potentially exposed to this behavior where the market just may not think these are interestingly valued enough eventually, and therefore we have to be careful about how we think about creating enterprise value in those businesses.
I'm going to come to that in just a second, but I do want to, do you think that it really is, at the end of the day, more about profit growth and operating margins, or in some cases, will this be akin to what we saw when the automobile replaced the horse and buggy, when the refrigerator replaced the ice delivery man, when the spreadsheet replaced the calculator, that we'll have to re-underwrite these companies with an assumption of a terminal value of 0?
I think it's a continuum. I think some of the lighter weight applications, it's going to be hard for them to go sell successfully in the enterprise that are trialing these models and coming up with building that software on their own with Claude, right? And one of the things we're going to look for in the next 6 to 9 months is what is happening to sales cycles of these companies. And then I think it's a continuum all the way to businesses that are in much more regulated markets, where you have interconnections into states and federal policies, and think about the financial infrastructure, things like that. Claude isn't just going to be able to build the workflows and replace. So I think it's a continuum where it goes from re-rating to, is this really, there's fundamentally a better way to do things.
People have often thought about things like regulation as a liability. In this case, it could actually be an advantage, a moat, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, look, I think if you take a step back and think about the proverbial Silicon Valley or the tech ecosystem building, every company in Silicon Valley, I would describe it as a C Corp writing code, right? If they were not in the regulated markets and it was sort of core infrastructure or there was sort of simple productivity applications, there were these C corporations with engineers writing code. But in the world where code self-writes, which is where we're headed, what is the purpose of those entities? So I think what you're seeing is just the transformation, the overall opportunity. Innovation is not going to stop. There's a whole AI stack that's emerging that allows for enterprises to take advantage of AI. And then there's all this transformation of these industries that is happening using these models. So there's a lot to do in the context of where investment needs to go. But there's a category of companies where the AI will do that work for us. I think instead of giving us software to be more productive so that human cognition can be leveraged in enterprises, software will just do that work for us.
As you noted, this isn't a thought experiment for you personally. General Catalyst has invested heavily in AI, both in AI foundation model developers, Anthropic and Mistral, as you mentioned, as well as hundreds of companies that are applying AI in various ways to make business more efficient and more productive. Now, I'm aware of the fact that at least a couple of GC investments have already succumbed, if you will, to AI evolution. How vulnerable is the rest of your portfolio as you see it now, going back to that conversation you were telling us about having last night?
Yeah, look, I think we have, so at GC, we have been guided by two big themes simultaneously. One has been around applied AI and the evolution of the infrastructure and diffusion of AI into enterprises. The other is around global resilience, which does come down to how do countries where we do business, so US, Europe, India, all the allied sort of markets, how do key industries become, so countries have strategic autonomy in them. So what happens in healthcare and defense and energy and manufacturing, financial services. So we have a large part of our portfolio focused on what are the regulated markets. We sort of went deep into them over the last 15 years, knowing that these were places where founders could actually have long-term moats. And in fact, it was driven by an observation that the technology platforms had such an advantage in sort of unregulated markets that it was important for us to diversify. It was actually a conscious choice we made about 14, 15 years ago. Right? And so we're fairly insulated in that regard. We also went fairly deep into hardware as a result. If you think about defense, if you think about manufacturing, we ended up building a lot of companies like Anduril and Saronic and Helsing and Rafi here in India. Healthcare we're deep in. We're building hospitals here with PB Health, for example. So I think we are fairly diversified. But our core SaaS portfolio, when you think about content management, or you think about productivity, or you think about sort of core data infrastructure, we are thinking about it as what do you do with these companies? I mean, it's a small part of our NAV, but it's a part of our NAV where a lot of what I addressed are questions we are actively thinking through on how can AI be an advantage for those businesses? And if not, then how do they persist in the long term and on a cash flow basis with reasonable multiples can actually be good investments?
When we talk about moats, we're talking about sustainable competitive advantage, and it is clear that in some cases those moats are disappearing. We've talked about at least one area in which the moats might be durable, regulated industries or software providers to regulated industries where they're deeply entrenched in a regulatory structure. Where else, Hemant, do you see moats as being durable?
Yeah, look, so if you look at the software application in enterprise, the thing we look for from a moat standpoint is there proprietary data that the models aren't really trained on? And the second thing is there learning going on in these systems? I mean, a lot of the systems of records aren't really used in a way that knowledge is essentially being captured. It's really data and its workflows on top. And so if there isn't sort of true secret sauce of the enterprise being captured in those systems, then they are vulnerable. Because migrations can be handled by AI easily. Data is your data. You can post-train these models on your data. And then if there's not a learning, then those workflows can actually easily be replaced by observing how the enterprise functions. So I think the way you build software in this next phase, how you think about products, will evolve from how a lot of these sort of traditional software companies used to build.
One of the central debates in AI evolution, and we're going to hear a lot about it over the next couple of days, is around safety and responsibility. And that is one in which you personally have played a leading role with your 2022 book, Intended Consequences, and also with the Responsible Innovation Labs, which you founded in 2023. Now, Anthropic, which Hemant has noted General Catalyst is an investor, has arguably put a higher premium on safe and responsible AI than some of its rivals. However, on this very issue, Anthropic, is caught in a battle with the US government at this very moment over how Claude, its LLM, is being used. I'm sure you would agree there is a lot at stake, both financially and philosophically.
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, the reason we worked on a responsible innovation protocol was because of the ambiguity that we started the conversation with. In the world where you don't know what the capabilities of the models are, as now we have seen for the last couple of years, sitting down and regulating back then was not going to be useful. Europe actually ended up doing the regulation, and that frankly stalled innovation there, and I think there's a lot of regret around that. And so our whole point was, if the founders can build with an innovation protocol where they're thinking through the second and third order effects of AI on all stakeholders, then with that responsibility, we push out the pressure to have regulation in the short term and let the technology settle and then figure out how it interfaces with the society at the applied AI layer, and then do the regulation there as it should be. We actually got pushback on that when that happened, because it was mistaken for, we're saying that protocol is essentially inviting regulation. That was not the point. Now, I think Anthropic is one of those companies that is built with those values from the beginning. I think as that becomes more and more pervasive, it is now becoming core infrastructure in the government as well, just like it is in a lot of the enterprises. And government has use cases where there is a constructive confrontation in terms of where do you draw the line. And I think I'm confident they will be able to end up in a place that makes sense, that follows the law and follows the values of the company. And I think these are ongoing conversations right now. So it's very real time, and I'm optimistic that we'll end up in a good spot there.
Well,
if not, we'll talk about it the next time we're together.
I'm going to summarize quickly for those of you here who might not be up to speed. The Pentagon wants to use AI models, not just Anthropic's, for what it describes as all lawful purposes. It, of course, isn't being specific about what those purposes might be. Anthropic doesn't want its technology used for operations such as domestic surveillance or autonomous lethal activities. It is being specific. As you've pointed out, this has been playing out over a period of months. What's at risk for Anthropic, and you can see this being the case potentially for other developers over time as well, is losing access to one of the largest and potentially most profitable sources of revenue, business with the U.S. government. So this is, I think, what everybody here in this room wants to know from you, Hemant. You're a champion for responsible AI, and you're an investor in Anthropic. What should Dario do?
This was a hard question he was talking about that I did not ask him for. Just wanted to say. I think where I draw the line is we have democratic values, okay? And technologies should be used in a way that those values are respected. And I think that's where it's the new. I tend to live in the gray. I don't think of the world as black or white. I think we get in trouble when we do that, especially in the world of such ambiguity. And this is where the hard conversations need to be had as to what is the intent with which these technologies are going to be used. Is it to surveil all of us for what we're doing? That's against the democratic values, and that would be problematic. But is that really what the government is really thinking about? We don't really know that. So I think the key here is they need to get in a dialogue with each other and figure that out. Anthropic knows what's at stake. They know it's not just the government as a large customer. It's also all the companies that do business with the government, right? If you think about sort of strategic proposition around what these technologies are going to be categorized as. So I am optimistic it'll end up in a good spot. I believe in sort of the discourse that is being had there, and I also do commend the technology teams at Anthropic for sticking to their values. I think that's important. I think this is a defining technology of our generation, and we should be having these debates as to where do you draw the line.
Back in 2023, in a piece you wrote with Fareed Zakaria, you envisaged AI heading toward what you described as two hermetically sealed ecosystems. One, democratic in nature, and the other subject to state control. An AI Cold War, if you like. Things are different now, right? Since then, under President Trump, the U.S. has pivoted toward at least more aggressive deregulation of AI and emphasized the need for unconstrained AI capabilities as a national security imperative. So the geopolitics of AI, as I say, are different. Where do India and the global South more broadly fit into that picture today?
It's a really good question. It's sort of the way the world has unfolded is really interesting. U.S. has usually gone the path of advance the technology, sort of open up the systems, and was a big champion of open source. But in AI, the open source activity is actually diminished. Now, there's renewed efforts to get U.S. open source working, which I'm excited about. The model companies that are closed-end models with Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini, those have continued to progress extraordinarily. I think they've accelerated in their pace. China sort of views this as what do you need to actually economically progress as businesses in this next phase? You need energy. They have a lead in that. You need manufacturing prowess. They have a lead in that. And you need AI. And they don't have a lead in that and trying to commoditize it. So the Chinese models are actually very good. DeepSeek, as you mentioned earlier, is a very impressive company in the way to develop technologies, and they're commoditizing. A lot of companies, even in the US, when they start, they're using the cheap Chinese open source models because it's a cost-effective way to build. So India now is sort of an interesting opportunity because the idea is you do need to focus on strategic autonomy, so you can't really use Chinese models for those use cases. But there is a constant push on cost, given the cost structures here for businesses. Okay, so there's a real challenge, and so the interesting thing to develop, and I'm excited to see what happens over the next couple of days, and the rumblings are already positive, is how India leans in towards building its own open source infrastructure, and then I think if I was to forward project, what happens is India leverages the sort of advanced AI infrastructure that's being built in the US and develops open source models that are indigenized and also commoditized for mainstream adoption of AI in the country as well.
Ashwini Vaishnav, who is the Minister for Electronics and Information Technology, in addition to being the Minister for several other things, told me a few months ago in Singapore that India will be one of 3 countries to dominate the future of technology alongside the United States and China. Now, he was talking about technology writ large, not just technology in the context of artificial intelligence. But with respect to AI, Hemant, can India, if it wants to, can India catch up? Can India participate the foundational model development level?
So I think India is absolutely behind in the foundational model race and having access to infrastructure that's local as well. So I think that is going to take a few years. And in fact, it can't wait for all that to be in place for its businesses, or otherwise the companies there will be highly, highly disadvantaged in their ability to be globally competitive. So India has to figure out a way to be a leader in applied AI while the infrastructure is in flight, however long that takes. And I actually think the country is extremely well positioned to lead in applied AI, and for the simple reason that my observation is that the companies that are doing really well in the US today, building applied AI use cases, are the ones that are great at working with customers. We call this the forward deployed engineering motions, that can bring the AI expertise, develop deep relationships with customers, and then figure out how to solve their problems and build their business off of that. It's not a traditional concept of here's a core product and I'm going to sell it over and over to these companies. It's more of a we've got these AI frameworks and I'm going to go solve the problems of this customer and do as many of those things as I can for this particular customer, and then find other customers like this. Sort of a different way where each customer is almost a design win. Okay, and what's happening is that in India, with the IT industry and how it's evolved, what is forward deployed engineering? It is consulting. It's IT consulting, given a fancy name. And so the talent here actually knows how to do what it's going to take to build these applied AI companies. So I'm pretty optimistic that as more and more capital gets unleashed here and founders start building more AI-centric companies, that particular skill set is going to shine in helping build a next generation leading applied AI companies.
This country operates what I might describe as a high-touch, labor-intensive economy that prioritizes maximum employment participation over efficiency, which in many ways is the antithesis of what AI is trying to achieve. How does India reconcile that fundamental tension?
This is the defining question for India, in my opinion. Okay, and I say that because we have a young demographic that's going into work, and if you fight AI in the short term, you protect the jobs that create work for them, introduce them in the workforce. But in the long term, you lose having businesses that are globally competitive. So you have to lean into AI. You have to lean into AI, not be afraid of it, and figure out how to give AI productivity to every single person in India. Imagine the productivity quotient of the nation and what it will be able to do, what it will be able to achieve, what the people getting into workforce will be able to do, and the kind of creativity you'll unleash. In the last generation, Aadhaar and UPI, these were complete leapfrogs of systems that were created in India, and the rest of the world is looking at it saying, how do we do that? I think leaning into AI is going to lead to that across the entire economy. So fear will set the country back. I strongly believe that leaning into AI and unleashing human potential in India is the way to win in the long term for the country.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found this conversation as instructive and as enjoyable as I did. Please join me in thanking Hemant Taneja.